welcome today. Thanks for the introduction, Chelsea, and thanks for inviting me here virtually. This is actually one of my favorite things to talk about is interviewing, just because there's so much that goes along with it. So we're going to be talking today about a lot of the things that go along with interviewing in just that lens, but also from the larger lens of interviewing virtually. So if that's helpful to think about. Okay, so if for those of you who love agendas, here's what we're going to be talking about: things to do before the interview, preparation-wise, technology-wise, kind of getting dressed for the part, things to do during the interview. I'm also going to go over strategies for answering interview questions and then how to tackle some of the tougher questions that you might get, and then some things to make sure that you are, moving forward and kind of avoiding the pitfalls that might come along with video interviewing. So bottom line, what I want you to think about for interviews is interviews are about fit. I work with so many students who have so much anxiety when it comes to the interview process, and that's fair. It's, it's good to be kind of have some positive nervous energy about it. But what's also important to remember is that when you get to an interview, you have been chosen because of the qualifications on the documents you submitted. So automatically, step one, they like you. What they want to figure out is, would they want to work with you as a person? Do you accurately represent the skills that you have put on those application documents? So step one, if you get to an interview, you're already qualified to be there. So let those kind of qualification worries just fall off your shoulders. And the interview itself is about how you fit with the organization's people, their mission, their values. So the same rules apply for video interviewing as they do for in-person interviews, with some extra rules added in, just because there's so many more things to think about and so many more things to prepare. So let's dive into what some of those things are. Additionally, so before it was a video interview, you would probably just prepare by thinking about the logistics in terms of parking and travel and transportation, what you're going to wear. But there's some additional things to think about when you think about a video interview. So step one, you definitely want to make sure you clarify the medium and the time zone. So we, as VCU students and faculty and staff, are used to working with Zoom, but are you going to be using another platform to do an interview? And are you familiar with that platform? And are you interviewing with a company that is in California? So think about the time zone and the medium. And if possible, do a test run. Do you need to download some sort of software in order to participate in the interview? If you are operating on a laptop and you're not going to be somewhere where you can plug in, make sure you charge up your computer and check your battery level right before. I know kind of using the battery or being active on your computer drains your battery a little more quickly than it does if it were asleep. So make sure that you're all good there. If you are having a phone interview, it's good to not use speakerphone, just because I know I'm operating on an older model iPhone, model cell phone, and speakerphone and audio uses or sounds differently on mine than it would on a newer. So just be mindful of what it looks like there. When you're in an online video interview situation, you want to make sure you check your lighting. You don't need to go out and buy a ring light or anything like that, but move some lamps closer to you. And ideally what you want to have is the light shining on you from behind the computer screen or from one side or another. What you don't want to do is be sitting in front of a light source, because that'll show up as kind of a little halo effect. And while you may look angelic, they won't be able to see your features. So make sure your lighting is good there. And if you can, make sure your camera is at eye level. So what you don't want to happen is to have your camera up too high so you're looking at them, or down too low so you're looking down at them. So stack up your computer or your camera to make sure it's directly at your eye level. So that way they're staring you kind of head on. And then there are different rules about what it means to show up early for a video interview. So, if you were showing up for an in-person interview, it might be 10 to 15 minutes was good. That's all that you would need. But that is way too early to show up to a video interview. So showing up early on a video interview means maybe 2 to 3 minutes early, and that's as much as you need. So you don't want to potentially interrupt another session that they're having or be on there too long. So 2 to 3 minutes early is all you need for a video interview. And then it's always a good idea to have a backup plan, no matter if you're interviewing virtually or in person or over the phone. So say, the worst happens, your computer dies, your internet goes out. what are you going to do? Make sure you have a phone number of somebody you can call. Make sure you can, if you've got the app on your phone that you can use to video interview, that way have some sort of backup plan so that you still get to participate if the worst happens. Things to do to set the scene. I like to think about video interviews as open book tests. So you get to have whatever you want right in front of you. So what you don't want to do is necessarily be, having all these documents right in front of you and then be looking down and reading from them the whole time. That doesn't look so great. But use the space around your monitor. You can put sticky notes up there, positive affirmations, things that you want to remember. Have the job posting out in front of you, have your resume or your CV out in front of you so that you can be prompted easily to think of these things. And so that makes the video interviews slightly easier than in person because you get to have these things right in front of you and refer to them when you need to. It's always a good idea to be aware of distractions. So if you've got pets or roommates or family members that may pop up, and make sure you put a sign on your door or, crate up your pets or do what you need to do to minimize distractions as much as you can. And then also close any other computer programs or browsers. I know my email is set to ding and give a notification every time I get a new email. And that has been quite annoying when I have been trying to do presentations or meet with people. So I have turned that off, or I've learned to close my email when I'm doing these things. So make sure that you do that for anything that would make a noise. And then virtual backgrounds are also another good solution if you feel like the background that you have just isn't professional or isn't neat or tidy or as neat or tidy as you would want it to be. So I know VCU automatically loads some through and you can access them on the settings, or you can look up. I found some great ones in Canva. So the one I'm using actually today is from Canva. It's one of my favorite ones. So if you do use a virtual background, make sure it's not anything distracting, make sure it's professional, and they're still going to be focusing on you rather than the background. You still do want to dress up for virtual interviews, and for the top and the bottom, because you never know when you're going to need to stand up. I think we've all heard some horror stories about news anchors or anybody else who, maybe only did half of the professional outfit. So just go ahead and dress up top to bottom because you never know what would happen. And for an interview, you want to dress a little bit more conservatively. So a suit or dressy business casual would be the way to go. We do have, for all VCU students, to access a professional clothing closet on the Monroe Park campus. You can schedule an appointment to access it, and you can, it is, gently used professional clothing that you can take for free and keep. So if you have questions about that, I'd be happy to provide information about how to get connected with that. There's also the rule of 5, and so that applies to folks who wear jewelry. And so what the rule of 5 is it means that you shouldn't be wearing more than 5 pieces of jewelry at any one time, and each earring counts as one. So I forgot to put in earrings today, not wearing a necklace, only wear my watch, so I'm good. I have less than 5 pieces. But that is helpful because overall, when you're dressing, you want to make sure that they're focusing on you and what you're saying and not what you're wearing. It shouldn't be anything that's distracting. So I used to work with a recruiter from Kohl's who loved bangle bracelets at the time of her interview, and she was also a hand talker. So she ended up getting the job that she was applying to, but all her supervisor remembers about that interview is the noise that her hands were making when she was, gesturing wildly because she was so excited about the interview. So make sure, again, what you're wearing is not comfortable for you and not distracting. And then a good rule of thumb to make sure it is going to be comfortable for you is to try sitting in your outfit. So during a video interview, you're going to be sitting down for a certain amount of time. So make sure you're comfortable and you're not going to be shifting and adjusting the whole time. So during the interview, I know with Zoom, it's tricky. And so one thing that I end up doing with Zoom is I end up looking at my camera screen a lot, or look at my image on the screen a lot of times. But you want to make sure you're looking at the interviewer and not at yourself. So what you want to do in Zoom, at least, is to change your view. There's the little view selector on the top right. Select speaker view, so that way the interviewer or whoever you're talking to shows up in the larger screen, and then you show up as the smaller screen on top. That way, if you're looking at yourself or looking at the interviewer, they can't tell. So make sure you at least select the speaker view, or if you don't have control of the view, make sure you're looking at the camera, your webcam. And then if you're someone who likes to do short confirmation words to show that you're listening, if somebody's talking and you go, and you do that to show that you're listening, that actually messes up the audio on a video call. So it's best to just be quiet while somebody else is talking and then let them finish talking before you start talking. Because if you're trying to talk at the same time that they're talking, you're not going to be able to hear what they're saying. So let them finish speaking as well. And then have a definitive end to your answer. I'll give you a tip a little bit later on how to do that. But in video interviews especially, it's really tricky to tell when somebody's done talking if they kind of just trail off, and get slower and more quiet, because in the interviewer, it might just kind of lean forward and be like, are they done talking, or is my audio going out? Can I not hear them? So make sure you have a definitive end to your answer. And then again, you want to be mindful of, you don't know what their audio is like on their side. Your microphone might not be picking up as much as you think. So make sure you are speaking clearly and projecting your voice so that they can hear you. Interviews and video interviews are inherently awkward situations. So if something happens, if you have a cat and they walk across the screen, or if a train goes by your apartment or something like that, just acknowledge the situation. You're not going to be knocked out of an interview because of something like that happening accidentally. But just explain any interruptions if they happen, or if you anticipate any interruptions. If you know that somebody's going to come home in the middle of the interview and that's going to set off your dog, no matter what happens, just say, hey, you may hear my dog at some point. This is what's going to happen. This is my situation. So the people who are interviewing you are human. They know, and chances are they're in a very similar situation. So just acknowledge that fact and be okay. And then be mindful of nonverbals. So it's really hard if you are not someone who's kind of very expressive. I know that I talk with my hands a lot, so you can see kind of some of the enthusiasm that I have. But if you're not someone who does that, it's hard to get enthusiasm, especially over a video screen. So be mindful of the nonverbals that you're sending. And then, if this is a role that you're really excited about, it's okay to show that you're excited about that. If you're not the most smiley person in the world, you don't have to go in there and be like, yes, I'm so excited to be here. This is the best day ever. That would look weird if that's not naturally you. But show through the words that you use and the way that you pay attention and, engage with the interviewers that you're excited to be there. You still want to make sure that you're doing your research before you get into an interview situation. So you want to know the employer that you're interviewing. You want to have some information about yourself, enough that you remember, so you don't have to rely on notes. So things that you might look up, and I'll go over some things that you might look up about an employer, but things you might want to know about yourself is really anything that's on your application documents, because anything on there is fair game for an interview questions. And you also want to have questions. So I generally suggest writing down about 10 questions before you get into an interview, because chances are they may answer some of your questions along the way. And so it's good to ask maybe 2 or 3 questions during the interview, or more if you have time for more. But if you have more than that, then you'll be prepared if they do answer some of your questions. So these are some examples of things that you might not want to know about yourself. And you can see these probably look like sections of your resume or your CV. So again, studying over the application documents that you submitted, and a good activity to prepare is to have a story for everything that's on your document. So what would you say if you were asked about that leadership role in that club or organization? Or what would you say if you were asked about that rotation that you listed on your document? So just having a story can help you make those connections and highlight your skills a little bit easier when it comes time to talk about it in an interview. And if you kind of are stumped about what to talk about in terms of your skill set, there's a couple different things that you can pull from. So NACE is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and they have established through surveys of employers over the years, I think 10 or a certain amount of career readiness competencies. And so what they have defined, and so what they mean by this is if students or recent graduates have all of these things and they do them well, they are kind of stamped career ready. And so the areas that they identified that are important are things like critical thinking and problem solving, oral and written communication, teamwork and collaboration, digital technology, leadership, professionalism and work ethic, career management, and global and intercultural fluency. So those you can see are not industry specific. Those are things that across all industries. So what can be helpful also is to think about these competencies and think about where you fall in terms of your skill level. So how might you talk about your critical thinking and problem solving? Because we've identified that every employer wants somebody with those skills. How would you talk about your leadership or how you manage your career and identify opportunities for you to grow? So that's a great thing to think about also. Let me make my screen bigger. There we go. You also could think about specific competencies for your industry. And so here's an example of one that I've pulled. So the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education has identified these 6 competencies for entry-level physicians. So you can see it's everything from patient care, medical knowledge, practice-based, but also some of the things that we just talked about in NACE. So professionalism, interpersonal and communication skills. So thinking about your skills in terms of these competencies, whether they're specific to your industry or cross-industry like the NACE ones, can be helpful to give you things that you might want to talk about in an interview. So you might write down on that sticky note that you're going to pop on the side of your computer screen, patient care, this story from this rotation, or medical knowledge, this is how I study best, or things like that. So those are also great things to pull from if you're kind of stumped about what to talk about in terms of your skills for an interview. Things that you might want to look up about an employer are their mission, their values, their organizational structure and career path. So how might you move up within an organization? What are they in the news for? Is it good? Is it bad? What is the size of their organization? So if you're going to be working at a small organization of 4 people, it's a lot different than if you'd be working at an organization of 50. You might need to be a generalist versus a specialist. And there's a lot of things that go along with that. Where are they physically located? Who's their competition? And then what do they do? So that's kind of a basic check sheet of things to know about an employer. As you look into their website, you'll find things that prompt questions. So you may be looking at their HR site and they've got this really cool thing that they let employees do, and you can ask about that. Or they've got a different mission and values for what would be your department versus what is the organization as a whole. So you can see how those two compare. So let the questions that you think of be a result of your research and reflect genuine interest. One thing to absolutely make sure you do is to keep the job posting. So once you apply for something, whether it's, if it's posted online, once that opportunity closes, a lot of times that job posting goes away and you don't have access to it anymore. So save it, print it, do something, screenshot it so you have it, because that's your cheat sheet. That is where the employer has told you what they want for somebody in that role. So if you keep that and use it as a study guide, that will also be a good thing. Types of questions that you might get range from everything from educational background to sensitive questions, and I'll go over what those are. Career goals, personal qualities. Again, these probably look like maybe either sections of your resume or things that you've thought about addressing in a cover letter. We also have, I won't click on it, but we also have a link to general or common questions that you might be asked. And so I can share the slides after, and then you can have access to this link as well. So one of the resources or one of the methods that's really good at helping you address those situational questions, and what I mean by situational questions are the ones that start with, tell me about a time when, or what would you do if, those kinds of things. Tell me about a time when you had to step into a leadership role, or tell me about a time when you had a conflict. What an employer is looking for with those types of questions is a story. How you acted in a situation like that, because everybody's had to step up into a leadership role at some time. Everybody has disagreed with somebody at some point. So they want to know how you act in a certain situation. So the best way to answer that question is to follow what's called the START technique. And so that's where you describe the situation that you were in, the task that you needed to accomplish, the action that you took, the results of that situation, and then the knowledge that you gained. So this can be used for a lot of different things, and you can use piecemeal, kind of whatever works for you. But let me show you an example of that. So say, for example, you're in an interview and the interviewer asks you to tell me about a time when you experienced conflict while working on a team. So you might say, I worked with a team on writing an article. One of my teammates was not completing their section, so we divided up their work. If I could see you, I would make you raise your hand and tell me if this is a good answer or not. I'm going to assume that your answer is no, this is not a good answer, because it is very short and it doesn't really tell you about what this person did. So a better answer using the START technique might be, you can see I've color coded each of these. So the S section, so the situation in my lab last spring, we worked on a team to get a paper published. T, one of my teammates, T is for task. One of my teammates wasn't doing their part of the work. That's the task they had to address. The action is they pulled that person aside and said, you know, are there particular skills that we can use to better assign assignments to you? The result was they got to do something that they liked better, and we successfully completed each component. And the knowledge is that they would, you know, ask that question before starting any other group project. So that is a full and complete answer. You'll also notice that right here in the blue section, it says, so I pulled this person aside. And here it says we divided up their work. So when you're answering a situational question, you want to talk about what you did. Not what we did, because we are not interviewing, you are interviewing. So talk about the work that you did. So in general, when we are answering interview questions, it's always a good idea to provide examples, because it's kind of like showing versus telling. Like, you can tell anybody you have skills, but if you show them how you use and got those skills, then it's going to be better, and they'll be able to see it a little bit easier. There may be a time in a virtual interview, in any sort of interview, where you are just stumped or your mind goes blank and you're like, I had this great answer and now it's gone. It is absolutely okay to say, hey, that's a great question. Can I have a minute to think about it? Again, remember when I told you at the beginning, interviews are about fit. An interviewer wants you to do well. They've selected you because you have great qualifications. Again, they just need that last stamp of approval to move you through the process. So they want you to do well. So it's okay to take time to think about what your answer would be. You do want to make sure you're honest in this process. I'm sure you have experienced or will experience soon how small your world gets the further you get in your career. You will find that people know people who you met 5 years ago, who you just met today, and you don't know who talks. So just be mindful and keep your answers honest. And then speak clearly. I've said that before, but just make sure you're projecting so people can hear you. So some of the two, I think, probably least favorite questions that I talk about in mock interviews are, tell me about yourself and tell me about a weakness. So for tell me about yourself, I would love for you to think about this question as a freebie, because you really get to talk about whatever makes you look good. And so things that are good to talk about and tell me about if you get asked, tell me about yourself, is a little bit about your education. So maybe how you chose your program, what keeps you going, your motivation to stay in that industry, why you're interested in that employer, in that job. There may be a follow-up question about, why this job, why this employer, but you can't control any of the questions that they ask you. You can only control your answers. So you don't want to be banking on them asking you a question later that you could potentially address in this situation. So tell me about yourself. There's a lot you can do with it. What you don't want to do with it is say, well, I was born in North Carolina, and then for kindergarten, I brought this into show and tell. They only need to hear what's relevant for the role. So things that are good to think about or to talk about in this question are, like I said, so your education, your interest in the field, your interest and motivation to keep going in the field through your degree programs, and then why you would be a good fit or why you're interested in this position, this role, this company. And then for tell me about a weakness, they are, yes, looking for a weakness, and they want you to show that you are emotionally intelligent enough to be aware of your weaknesses, but this can also be a tricky one. So you do want to pick a weakness that's not essential to the job. So for example, if I'm applying for a teaching role, I don't want to say that I'm afraid of public speaking, because that's the main focus of the job. So you can be creative in the weaknesses that you think of in terms of how they are used in the job. What you don't want to do is be cliche also, and go down the route of I care too much, or, I hear a lot of, I'm a perfectionist, so I spend a lot of time on details. Maybe that's you, but that's also a very common answer. So be genuine about this, but also show that you are working on or have overcome this weakness so you can spin it into a positive. So you don't just want to say, well, I'm bad at public speaking. and leave it at that. You might want to say, I was bad at public speaking, but I spent a lot of time shadowing people who I thought were really great public speakers. And then I learned a lot through signing up to, give speeches. I signed up for Toastmasters. I had people give me feedback, and now I'm not, now I've overcome that weakness. So you want to talk about a weakness, but also spin it into a positive to show that you're working on it or have worked on it. Some of the sensitive questions that sometimes come along in interviews or anything related to the ones on the slide, they should not be asking you, employers or interviewers should not be asking you these questions. You have probably seen a couple of them towards the bottom: disabilities, or have you been arrested, in some form or fashion if you filled out a job application, but in a different way. So for example, you can't be asked if you have ever been arrested. What you can be asked is, have you ever been convicted of a felony or misdemeanor? Because arresting doesn't, provide that you're guilty. So these are all questions that could invite discrimination, so you should not be asked these questions. However, sometimes people are nervous around interviews, so not just the interviewees. They might just be trying to make conversation, or this might be the first time they've ever interviewed somebody and they kind of don't know what to ask. So if you are asked a question like this, you could, consider the interviewer's motive. So for example, if somebody asked me, how old am I? They might be wondering if I have enough years of experience to qualify for this role. So if I were to answer that or be asked that question, I might say, either I could say, could you explain to me how that relates to the role? Or I might say, I'm thinking by that question that you are wondering about my years of experience. I can assure you, and here's a copy of my application documents again, that I have this degree, I've had this many years of experience, and I am, qualified to do this job and excited to be here. So it's generally a good idea to avoid becoming defensive or angry if you get these questions, especially if you're interested in this role and not prepared to walk out. You could restate your interest and why you're a good fit. But if you are asked a question like that, you can refuse to answer. You can say, I'm not comfortable with answering that question, or I don't understand how it relates to the role. Can you explain that to me? So again, those are things that you should not be asked. Easy ways to avoid pitfalls during video interviews. I know we were talking before we got started about Zoom fatigue. We're all tired of being on the computer and talking to the computer at this point in what's going on in the world. But do what you can, especially during this session, during an interview, to keep your energy level up. So whether that is positive affirmations that you've got on Post-it notes around your computer screen, or, I know people are energized by exercise, so do some push-ups or something right before you start, or make sure that you follow your normal routine for that morning and make sure you eat a good breakfast, but do what you need to do to keep your energy level up so that you don't start kind of, not being attentive or not being as engaged as you want to be because you might be tired. It's also very easy to get a little too casual on Zoom situations or on video interviews because you are in your comfy space potentially. You might be sitting at home or in your bedroom or something like that. But be mindful that still is, you're trying to make a positive professional impression. So you do want to make sure that you're treating this as it is and giving this the professionalism that it deserves to that situation. Some general interview tips: you do want to make sure you prepare thoroughly, and you do want to practice. So the easiest way to make sure that you practice effectively for an interview is to practice out loud. A lot of people prepare by practicing or answering interview questions in their head or writing down their answers, but that's not how you're going to be answering those questions. So make sure you practice out loud so that you can create, I'm sure there's a science behind it, to creating that muscle memory or remembering how you're going to say it, but that will help you prepare more effectively than it would be if you were to practice in your head or write those things down. If you get nervous or if you get even overexcited, try to recenter yourself, and it may sound silly, but just take a deep breath. Even before you answer a question, if you just and then talk, that can help give the interviewer time to finish their question, but also give you a couple seconds to think about how you want to start your answer. So don't feel like you have to start talking the second they stop talking, but give yourself a time and a space to take a deep breath and then start answering. And a way to decrease that anxiety is to prepare by getting involved in the interview also. So make sure you get your questions asked, or sorry, your questions answered, and you ask them as you go through the interview process. So most likely they will ask you questions first, and then you will get an opportunity to answer questions. Some people like to flip it depending on their interview style. So just be prepared to ask your questions whenever they're ready to take them. But also realize that interviewers are human too, like I talked about with the awkwardness situation or with the sensitive questions. The interviewer may be just as nervous as you are, or they may have had a really bad experience with Zoom, like in the session that they did right before you. So they may have some anxiety. So don't, give people some space, and they'll give you some space also to be in that area of, what feelings come along with video interviews. And chances are this is not your first interview. So think about what has worked for you in the past and reflect upon that. So do you have a favorite suit that just makes you feel really good, and that's the one you wear for interviews? Or did you study or, read your CV in a particular way or in a particular time period right before the interview? So think about, what has worked for you in the past, and try to recreate that as well.